it's hard to even wrap my mind around this. But I'm coming up on 12 years graduating nursing school. Happiest time of my life. I would say passing the NCLEX. I think it was just so magical to be in that place where if you think about it, if you've ever graduated from like college with a degree and it was like a really difficult time, to no longer have to be on that level of insanity, I suppose. It's like music to your ears. It's like nothing you've ever experienced. I used to tell these young nurses that would come through for clinical at the hospitals that I would work at, I used to tell them like, oh my gosh, you're gonna be so happy when you're done. I would always try to encourage them because I remember how intense it was, to the point where I was battling some food addictions at the time, but I wasn't doing drugs or anything like that at the time. But my family member came to me after and was like, Cara, I thought that you might have been using because you didn't look good. And I was like, thanks, first of all. But then at the same time I was like, wow, like the stress really showed. And I almost wonder if some of the stress that I was enduring through nursing school carried, I don't actually wonder, I know that I did, but I'm just having this revelation right now, how really important it is that we're taking care of our digestive systems throughout seasons of stress with probiotics and certain lifestyle practices, trying to just mitigate the damage that's happening and reducing leaky gut. I think many of us know somebody or experience this for ourselves, but when something is really stressful, it's really easy to get sick. We have a lower immune system, and for me, I get like breakouts with eczema, and now after going through my own digestive healing and becoming a health coach, I understand that what's happening on the inside has to relate to how stress is affecting my gut and causing leaky gut. So it's just a given. So during that time, it's like 2 years of nonstop stress. Yes, there's break. I swear, I think before you go through life in like the working world, like you start working, you don't really have a frame of reference on what like stress is. So like to me, that was like my most stress I've ever experienced before. So I don't think I was like dreading anything. I didn't know to dread it. I'm glad that I didn't when I think back to it. But when I became a new grad, I was so happy because I no longer had to be in that place just on all the time. And then passing the NCLEX was like, oh, thank God I don't have to like do this again. And then I ended up taking a job in nursing within my first 2 months of passing the NCLEX, and it was at the hospital that I was working as a phlebotomist at. Now, I was working as a phlebotomist through nursing school, which was also, it disciplined me a lot because I had to wake up at like 3 a.m. to go do this job. I didn't have a normal life as a 19 to 21-year-old. And I made some sacrifices, but they were good ones, because every single decision that I made prior to me being able to kind of come on here and talk to you, it has gotten me something that has helped me on the next, in some next phase of life, which is how God orders our steps, I believe. He's always ordering our steps to set us up for the next blessing that He has. So for me, that was like already working in the hospital and having connections, so it's easier to get a job. I worked in psych, and I remember being I worked evenings, or I worked nights, and days. But I started my orientation on days and evenings because that's what my preceptor, I had like one or two preceptors, and she had an evening and a day rotation, so I was going to be with her. And I remember feeling so anxious, like waking up in the morning and like, oh my gosh, I have my first nursing shift as an RN today, and just like crying from being overwhelmed from the emotions of it all. And it was then that I realized, like, the anticipation of the shift, like waking up in the morning and then, you know, having that time, like some people like that, but for me, I didn't really like that. But I also, it wasn't natural for me to get off work at 11 o'clock and then come home and like be winding down to like 1 or 2 a.m. and then be going to bed. Like, to me, I always went to bed before midnight, so it just didn't make sense to my brain to start working evenings because I've always been on the early side of everything. But I got to try that a little bit on orientation, and my preceptor, she was so good. She was so kind, and I remember using like little phones to scan medication. Working in psych, we were, you know, we had the nurses station, and then we had the patients that we would go assess and everything, and I don't even think that we listened, like we didn't do much of a physical assessment on them at all. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was very weird. Like, that was ultimately the reason why I ended up leaving psych, because I wasn't actually using all the things that we were learning in nursing school, and I was nervous that I was going to be a career psych nurse and then not really like use like 90% of the things that I learned in nursing school. I think that might be an over-exaggeration, because you are always assessing your patient, you're always checking, you're always verifying that everything's the way it needs to be, safety. However, when you don't have that practice, that expertise as a foundation from like practicing nursing in a certain department, it makes sense that you wouldn't feel confident or competent at assessing your patient's physical assessment. So I was getting really proficient in mental assessment and mental health management, which is great. And everyone always told me, and this is true, it was never going to be a waste. It's never a waste to do it. And I don't think I would have done it if it was not done first. So it's just food for thought. And I feel like I got a lot of grace as a young person, being like brand new out of school, being like also really green in terms of like being young adult. I think older people gave me grace for being young. I say this a lot because I feel like I'm recognizing it now as I'm new to this facility and new to this unit. I feel like younger nurses, they get more grace, and just like almost like unspoken grace. And I think it's appropriate, but it's noticeable. That first year of nursing, I remember meeting so many amazing like seasoned nurses like that have been in the field since like 30-40 years. One of them, she was like the night charge nurse, like the person that everyone would go to when you had a question. She was like the example of like what a good nurse would be like. And I think I was really sad when she retired, but before she retired, I remember going on nights, and within like 3-4 months, they were training me on doing charge nurse on night shift. And I was like, at that time, I thought it was a little weird, but I didn't question it because it seemed like everybody that was hired there needed to be trained as charge, so everyone knew how to do it, so there would always be somebody that worked charge. Plus, it's a way for them just to like test how you tolerate those types of positions. So I got trained, and then I remember a lot of responsibility fell into my hands at a really young age. Like, I was 22 years old, and our psych unit had 102 beds. And when it's like I'm trying to remember what the position was called, but I actually really enjoyed it because you go around to each unit and you break the nurses. It's like the charge nurse of the 6 units. And sometimes you would work charge on the unit and you'd be like, it's usually you, so like you're charged by default, and then a mental health worker, which is like a nursing assistant but for mental health. And so it's just you two managing the unit. And I'm pretty sure on the ICU side there was 2 nurses. Can't remember right now. But on the general unit, like the one that's a little bit less severe, those ones, I remember feeling vulnerable. But again, it's the county hospital. Even though it was the county hospital, I always felt like we were pretty well staffed on psych. Like in my mind, I'm not really struggling to remember many times where we were understaffed in psych. And it was such an important part of the hospital because those beds were almost always full. We were like almost always at capacity or like near it. Like I'm talking 95 and above. So there's so many patients. So I'd break the nurses, I'd make sure all the papers, like you'd have to send the names of the staff that's coming in the next day. And like there's certain things that you had to fax to every unit. But I don't know, it was kind of an enjoyable position. And then when I switched from nights to just straight days, they had me do psych triage, and I remember that was like a special position. That one was the most difficult position that I did because when somebody got admitted, you had to put them properly in the right bed. And it was a learning curve, but I was grateful for the experience that challenged me early on because the next unit that I worked on, the charge position was even harder. The way that they staffed that unit, there was 8-hour nurses and 12-hour nurses instead of just 8-hour nurses. And if an 8-hour nurse was coming in, it was like this whole puzzle, like Tetris, that you'd have to do and figure out how to do it without making people feel like they were being screwed over. Yeah. And that the way they had that set up was like complex, and that made me appreciate working charge in later positions in other units where I worked. But I remember one position that I held in LA. I remember that charge position was not actually as overwhelming as the one that I held in Minnesota. And I think it was because of the very fact that you're not juggling intermediate care and those weird units, the weird blocks. I say all this to just encourage somebody. Like, sometimes we don't feel like we are ready for what's coming. We get an opportunity to take a position or to do like almost like a promotionary role and take the next step. I encourage you to take that when you're able to, because you never know what it's going to open the door to. And I'm really grateful that I got those experiences as a new grad, even though it was almost like I became a new grad again when I went to my surgical trauma unit, because I was learning so much about the med surg part. But that unit was so great, you guys, because today I still use, I want to say I use all my experience from those first years in nursing. Like, I use it so much every single day that I work, because almost everybody, gets surgeries that I take care of every day. And then almost everyone has anxiety or some sort of problem with their mental health that I have that background of. So Moral of the story, don't be afraid of psychiatric nursing. It's going to help you. Second moral of the story, take the opportunities that come your way, even if you feel like it's going to stretch you or you're not quite ready. For many of you, that might come naturally. For some of you, you might want to say, I'll do it later. But let me tell you something. Sorry, I can't get over that. Whenever that comes out of my mouth, I always think of that guy that they let fall out of the chair. Bungee jumping. So if I could tell you something, I would tell you that if your management or a supervisor is asking you if you want to train as charge or try this position or do this position, it means that they've seen qualities in you that demonstrate that you're able to get started. If they didn't ask you to do that, then you don't got to worry about it. Your next problem is now wondering, how do I approach my manager to talk about this position? And finding out what kind of qualities they're looking for in the person with this type of position, who works this type of position. Give feedback. I guess I'm kind of in this time of nursing where I almost don't want to be presented with another stressor, even though it's always a good thing. Sometimes going to do the next hard thing, like taking on a promotion, you know it's going to ask a lot of you. It's going to tax you. But after it, think about how many improvements that you've made as a person, qualities that you've strengthened. There's a lot of personal and professional growth that happens when you take these types of responsibilities and roles. So I just wanted to encourage you. Just my 2 cents. You guys have a wonderful day. Make sure to like the video and consider subscribing if you are looking for health, wellness, content that has to do with mental, physical, and spiritual health. Because here we do it through a Christian perspective, with the belief that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And God's wisdom can take us that much further. This is a great family, great community. We'd love to have you, and I'll see you soon.